You join us for round 9 of the 2008 GP4 Manager Series, and we're taking place at a brand new venue for this particular series. First time ever that we've come to Donington Park. You can see on the left is Takuma Sato, on the right is Jenson Button in this Toyota, and the green light is go, and on a very wet track Takuma Sato gets away pretty well into Redgate corner. Who's going to be bravest on the brakes? Sato on the inside, but look at Jenson Button round the outside, and I think he's taken the lead off of the Japanese driver as we round the Hollywood curve into the legendary Craner curves. Any more gainers and losers? Well, Sebastian Vettel is down from 5th to 7th. Hamilton and Massa have overtaken him, and battling away Jenson Button and Sato. Saw them swapping positions through the Hollywood and Craner curves just on the timing, but it looks as if Button has held the lead as we go through McLean's corner. That's exiting McLean's, or McLean's, however you like to pronounce it. Now into Coppice. It's a double right with a blind first apex, and then opens out onto the back straight. Now then, underneath what used to be the Dunlop Bridge, now it's the Vauxhall Bridge. Into the Fogarty S's that'll be, and up the inside of Sato goes Webber, but I don't think has he managed it? Well, we're switching to Christian Albers, who's running in 8th place at the moment, and out of the Fogarty S's and into the Melbourne Hairpin. And this 76 lap race, it's a short circuit, just 4 kilometres long, and up the inside of Sebastian Vettel goes Christian Albers at the Melbourne Hairpin, and he's got 7th place off of the Red Bull driver, so Vettel not having a good first lap. Best qualifying of the season, up in 5th place, but he's down to 8th. But in the lead, home hero Jenson Button, who won the last race at Silverstone, and he looks as if he's going to try and continue where he left off as he leads Mark Webber by 1.7 seconds. Sato's in 3rd, and Lewis Hamilton in 4th place. Nearly got a podium the last time out at Silverstone, but was just short, and Jenson Button won that one. Kimi Räikkönen was 2nd, and Sato was 3rd. The top 3 in the race, the top 3 in the championship as well. And with Mark Webber not having such a good race, down in 6th place as the 2 Ferraris go side by side through Starkey's, and then the left kink before McLean's. Let's call it McLean, but let's also call it McLean. I might interchange between the two throughout the race. And into Coppice, the 2 Ferraris, then the McLaren of Kamui Kobayashi. And now the background, we can see Christian Albers is having another look at someone else. It's on the Super Guri of Felipe Massa, qualified quite well in 7th, and he's made up a place to 6th place at the expense of the slightly tardy Sebastian Vettel. Now into Melbourne Hairpin, 180 degree right hand corner, and coming out of it there's a lot of curb being used even in the wet conditions. Pretty brave stuff, considering that it should be very, very slippery. And just looking at the grooves on the tyres, it looks as if they're all on the full wets because there is a lot of water out there. But turning right into Redgate is Takuma Sato in 3rd place, 1.4 seconds behind Mark Webber, and Jenson Button set another fastest lap on the 2nd lap, so he's going to try and pull out some distance. And look in the background, there's Sonic the Hedgehog. He's come to watch the race. That's quite nice to see as we go through Starkey's, and off the track at the old hairpin goes Massa. Is he going to hit the barrier with that? Well, we're trying to see through the viaduct of Starkey's Bridge, but I think he might be okay, but we'll just have to see if he gets moving after that one. That's the entire field. Yep, Massa's moving, so no damage to his car, just his pride at having made a mistake at the old hairpin. The left kink at Starkey's. And there's a look at Nick Heidfeld. He's getting a lot of understeer as he's being pressured by somebody from behind. Well, both Williams had a dreadful qualifying session. Heidfeld and Bianchi penultimate and last on the grid, and Bianchi outqualified Heidfeld by nearly half a second actually, so something really went wrong with Heidfeld during qualifying for this particular race. Both qualifying behind the 2 Renaults, who Barrichello's outqualified Kubica for the first time as he gets it sideways through Melbourne Hairpin, and now he's got Kubica trying to take advantage of that, but there's quite a lot of traction on the curb. And Jenson Button setting a new fastest lap as he extends his lead to 2.3 seconds over Mark Webber. Further back we've got Kimi Räikkönen in 5th place. He'd started 4th, but he's lost that to Lewis Hamilton, who's gained 2 places from his starting position of 6th on the grid. Both Red Bulls qualifying quite well. 5th and 6th occupying the 3rd row as Kobayashi's having a look at the inside of one of the Ferraris through the Craner curves into the old hairpin, and it is Sergio Perez who's ahead of Timo Glock. There goes Perez, but we are looking at Timo Glock right there, qualified quite well, but he's not had a good start to this race. Where did he qualify on the grid? I can tell you that. He was in 9th, so he's lost 2 places at the race start. As Mark Webber goes through the Fogarty S's, as Kimi Raikkonen has made up a position on Lewis Hamilton, so the McLaren on the move. As we look at an overhead shot of the Renault of Robert Kubica, with the number 14 on his nose box, and he's about to go into the Fogarty S's. He's in 19th place, chasing Adrian Sutil, 0.3 of a second between those two. Now, where is the second sector point? It's at the exit of the Fogarty S's, which means the final sector consists of 2 hairpin corners, Melbourne hairpin, and then this one that Timo Glock is approaching, Goddard's. Slightly less than 180 degrees, and it's a slow, frustrating corner. But you bypass quite a lot of the pit lane. Well, the pit lane bypasses a lot of that corner, actually, as Kobayashi is itching to get past Timo Glock at Redgate, but not quite managing that. Now let's see what Kimi Raikkonen can do now that he's got clear of Lewis Hamilton, as Kubica gets it a bit sideways going into Redgate corner. And then through Hollywood he goes. And then Craner, that's the left downhill kink, as somebody has had an off. And Kobayashi has taken Timo Glock, so I think Timo Glock has had an off at the old hairpin. And there's where the first sector point ends, right at the Starkey's kink. So off camera, there he is, Timo Glock. He's made the same mistake as Felipe Massa did a couple of laps ago at the old hairpin. Vettel has got past Christian Albers for 6th place, so both Red Bulls back to 5th and 6th now. Hamilton dropping a position, but Vettel gaining one. But if they're going to maintain the grid order, Vettel should ideally be in front. As it is, Hamilton is ahead of his German teammate. As Jenson Button, where's he going? I think he was crossing the start-finish line to start another lap. And see Montoya up in 8th place. He's had a good start to the race, getting a bit wide on the curb, and as a result he's got Fernando Alonso to deal with. Where did Montoya qualify? He qualified in 10th place, so yeah, good start for the Colombian in the BMW Sauber, even though Montoya's not had the best of seasons. Generally just overdriving the BMW Sauber, as Alonso has a look into Craner. That's not going to work. Now into the old hairpin. And this is the battle for 8th place. There's Hulkenberg in 14th place, I think that is, or maybe a little bit higher. He's 15th actually, so he's a little bit lower than where I said originally. It's Rubens Barrichello we're looking at, and he has got a Force India chasing him. That'll be Adrian Sutil, who did not have a good start to this race. He qualified in 15th and he is down in 17th at the moment, so not a good opening phase to the race for the German in the Force India team. That is a Toro Rosso getting a little bit, struggling a little bit on the brakes, but it's Daniel Ricciardo up in 12th place, and that's a good effort actually. He started 17th on the grid, so he's made up quite a few places in this opening segment of the race. And approaching Goddard, you can see a Ferrari, then a Super Aguri. That'll be Perez versus Alonso. Perez has overtaken Alonso somewhere on this lap, because he's now up to 9th place. Glock's still struggling. That's him struggling to turn into Melbourne hairpin. I'm just looking at a little bit closer towards the front of the field, and Kimi Raikkonen is definitely closing in on Takuma Sato for 3rd place. I wonder what tyre compound McLaren have gone for. They have gone for the hard compound tyres, interestingly, but in the wet, that's obviously irrelevant, as Kubica, no, it's Barrichello getting up the inside of Hulkenberg, as Kubica, there he goes off the track, and the Williams joining him as well. So, interesting little moment for those two. I think Kubica just lost it by himself, and then the Williams of, is it Nick Heidfeld, or it is Nick Heidfeld, just followed him off in sympathy. So, they've now dropped down to 21st and 22nd place, but the good news about the old hairpin is that there's quite a lot of runoff and a fairly big gravel track to slow the cars down if they have a spin, and so far we have seen lots of cars doing that, as there's contact between Bianchi and I think that was it's Adrian Sutil in the Force India going into the Fogarty S's, and probably after Carl Fogarty, the legendary British motorcycle rider. But we are in 4 wheels into the Melbourne hairpin, named after a nearby village, the village of Melbourne, just by the Donington Park circuit. Now into Goddard's the final corner, and even in the wet you can see Jules Bianchi's brakes glowing. As Perez, that is versus Alonso. Perez made a mistake at the exit of Redgate, and he has lost a position to Fernando Alonso. Now he's got Kamui Kobayashi to deal with. Turning into the old hairpin and a Toro Rosso, Daniel Ricciardo having a look at the inside of Kobayashi, but not enough space and not enough of a braking zone to make the move work. As mentioned before, McLaren's, if the race was dry, running the hard compound tyres, as Suttle has a little off-track moment at the exit of the old hairpin. Currently in 19th place, behind Felipe Massa. BMW Sauber, if the race had been dry, they've gone for the soft compound of tyres. And for Montoya, that qualified him in 10th place, and for Hulkenberg in 16th place. The German not getting his act together for qualifying in this particular race as a new fastest lap. I think that was for Jenson Button. Race leader, as Takuma Sato is about to cross the line in 3rd place, with Kimi Raikkonen behind. So Button, Sato and Raikkonen appears to be a three-way championship battle between those three drivers at the moment. Those three did finish 1st, 2nd and 3rd in Silverstone, and as a result they're on 115 points for Jenson Button, then a few points back, 4 to be exact, is Takuma Sato, and then on 106 points is Kimi Raikkonen. Mark Webber sits some 29 points behind Kimi Raikkonen at the moment. He sits on 77 points. So he needs something to happen to those three in front of him in the championship if he's going to remain in a championship battle. Because at this stage it does appear that it might well be a three-way battle for the championship between those three aforementioned drivers. Sergio Perez in 10th place, being challenged by Kamui Kobayashi. And there's Adrian Suttle going through, chasing Felipe Massa and gaining 2/10 through the first sector. Now the second sector, which consists of McLaren's, Coppice and the Fogarty S's. Very few corners on this Donington Park circuit, but it's an interesting little addition to the 2008 calendar, tying with the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and which means that you could run the races back to back. And it's just a short little drive from the Northamptonshire county all the way up to the Derbyshire-Leicestershire border. Mark Webber going through the old hairpin. He sits 3.1 seconds behind Jenson Button. And that's where the first sector point ends. It's between the left kinks of Starkeys. Now up the hill into the blind apex of Coppice as Sato being chased by the McLaren, and off the track goes Montoya. He's done it again. He's overdriven it, and was somebody else joining him as well, because Alonso looked very, very deep into the old hairpin, and I think Alonso has joined him. So once again, we see two drivers going off together at the old hairpin, a la Nick Heidfeld and somebody else early on, Kubica it was. Now where is Alonso in amongst that, because he's in there somewhere. Yeah, he's definitely in there. And I think it could be that Montoya has lost the engine. And if he has, that would be an absolute shame for himself and the BMW Sauber team, who lost a bit of form from three races where they were doing quite well. That was Hockenheim, then it was Malaysia, then Hockenheim, and then Monaco, where BMW Sauber had three particularly good races, but they've lost it a little bit. Yellow flags are still out, so I think Montoya's still stranded. Well, there he is, and yeah, he's stranded, so he could well be out of the race. Lap 11, so we're into double figures now, and Jenson Button holds a 3.3 second lead over Mark Webber. Both Toyotas absolutely pulling away from Takuma Sato, who doesn't look particularly comfortable in these wet conditions. Button and Webber on Pirellis, and Sato's on Bridgestones, and Kimi Raikkonen in 4th place on the Michelin tyres. So maybe Sato is just his car's just not handling very well in the wet conditions. Could be set up for a dry race, but it could be his Bridgestone tyres not working well either. Be a bit of a strange one if that was the case, because Adrian Suttle, when he won the Oceanian Grand Prix, he was on the Bridgestone tyres as well, and he drove an absolute blinder of a race. We seem to be looking at a stranded BMW Sauber at the moment. We need to be seeing some actual race action, particularly the battle for third between Sato and Raikkonen. The gap between those two, just 0.4 of a second. And Raikkonen would dearly love to get ahead of Sato and see if he can make chase after the two Toyotas. And yeah, Montoya's engine, well, he's stopped his engine and he's out of the race. So Montoya becomes the first retirement of what is probably going to be quite a long Grand Prix, 76 laps. And in the wet conditions, lapping a bit slower than they would be doing in qualifying. In qualifying, they were lapping in sub 1 minute 10s through the fast corners. Although it is a slow final sector, still fairly quick lap times. But in the wets, they're doing towards the high end of the 1 minute teens, towards the 1 minute 20s. As still looking at empty track and Lauda and the rest of. There's another driver off, and it's Daniel Ricciardo. And is that of the old hairpin as well, I wonder? Could well be. That is a particularly hot corner in this race. Lots of drivers going off there. I have a feeling it is the old hairpin. And that's a shame for Ricciardo. He was driving quite well. So let's move Matthias Lauda into the points. Paul Di Resta in the other Toro Rosso up to 11th place. So both Toro Rossos were pretty quick in this race, but one of them's gone into the gravel trap and the other one is in 11th place. That's Montoya's teammate, now 13th place. And Ricciardo's out as well, so he's beached it in the gravel trap. And now the marshals have got to double their workload because they've just pushed Montoya out of harm's way. Now they've got to do the same to Daniel Ricciardo. There he is being wheeled away. So Toro Rosso on the Michelin tyres. It could be that the Michelin wets are working quite well. The Michelin full wets anyway. Because we're seeing the two Toyotas on these. In fact, they're on Pirellis, so never mind what I've been saying. Those teams on the Michelins. You've got McLaren, Red Bull, Toro Rosso and Williams. Two teams on Bridgestones. They are... Well, whoa, look at that. Raikkonen trying around the outside of Sato. Is that the inside of Fogarty S's? Either way, Kimi Raikkonen has got past Takuma Sato for third place. You have to feel that was almost inevitable, although it did take Raikkonen a bit longer than he'd hoped. Because Sato's car not handling particularly well in the wet weather of Donington Park. He's down to 4th place and is still trying to push Daniel Ricciardo away. Well, at least we saw Kimi Raikkonen's overtake into the Fogarty S's. Now he's got 8.6 seconds, make that 8.5 seconds to make up on Mark Webber. Second place Webber, 3.4 seconds behind Jenson Button, race leader. It looks as if the marshals have not done a particularly good job at craning Ricciardo's car away, or maybe they're waiting for the crane to be done with Montoya before they can crane Ricciardo off. Just looking a bit further down the order, we've got Lewis Hamilton still in 5th place. He's not that far ahead of Sebastian Vettel. Gap between the two, just 0.6 of a second. 7th place at the moment is Christian Albers. And Albers, he qualified very well actually. He was 8th on the grid. Now he's up to 7th place. He seems to have got the measure of his German teammate Adrian Sutil in the qualifying, because he's out-qualified him how many times? He's out-qualified him 6 times out of 9 races. And in some ways it's a little bit surprising, because you'd normally expect the younger, more feisty German to be the quicker one in qualifying, but no. Christian Albers has out-qualified him more times, as Timo Glock gets it a bit wide at the exit of the old hairpin. Now he has got the Super Aguri to deal with. Is that Felipe Massa or is it Fernando Alonso? Both of those two drivers have had offs at the old hairpin. And immediately after passing Takuma Sato, Kimi Raikkonen is the fastest driver out on the circuit. Took 0.6 out of Mark Webber on that particular lap. And, well, there is the problem actually that the marshals are having between Ricciardo and Montoya. Seems that they can't make their mind up as to where those two cars should be going. Which one to crane off first. Sebastian Vettel's just lost 2 positions. Albers, he's lost even more positions. Has Sebastian Vettel got an issue? Certainly haven't seen it at the old hairpin, so he's gone off somewhere else. So now Vettel dropping down the order. He was running in 6th place, but he's passed by Albers, Kobayashi, Perez, and it's a suspension failure, so mechanical issues for the unlucky Sebastian Vettel, who's I must say, he's not having a particularly good season in the Red Bull. He's sitting on how many points? 22 points. And they consist of a 5th in Australia, that's Melbourne, a 9th at Sepang, and then you've got a 6th in Austria, and another 9th at Silverstone. But that's kind of it, really. Hamilton has had the measure of him all season. Hamilton having 2 5th places at Sepang and Hockenheim, a 4th at Silverstone, nearly a podium finish, which would have sent the crowd in even more of a frenzy with 2 British drivers on the podium. And Hamilton has also had an 8th place at Adelaide and then a 6th place at Monaco, and he currently sits on 44 points in the championship, giving Red Bull a total of 66 points, which at the moment it leaves them in 4th place in the Constructors, 5th place in the Constructors' Championship, 5 points behind Force India. That's through the Melbourne hairpin, and we're having a look at Timo Glock, who is a little bit down the order after his off at the old hairpin. He's in 17th place. Now, is that half a second behind Suttle? I think it is. They're about to cross the start-finish line. Well, it was half a second, but it's gone up to over 1 second. As you were just looking at a brick wall there. Let's have a look at the front of the grid, because we've got Jenson Button leading by 3.9 seconds now over teammate Mark Webber, and Webber seemingly responding to the attack of Kimi Raikkonen, because it's now gone up to 7.6 seconds. It's now gone down to 7.4 seconds, so Kimi Raikkonen gaining a couple of tenths in the sector that they have just gone through. And Takuma Sato, 3.7 seconds now behind Kimi Raikkonen. And Lewis Hamilton, 1.3 seconds behind Takuma Sato. So if Lewis Hamilton can close up to Sato, he might be able to challenge for 4th place. And if something happens between the top 3, then that could be even better for the talented driver from Stevenage, somewhere in Hertfordshire. So if anything, Silverstone is more his local circuit rather than Donington, but still another home race for Lewis to race at, and indeed for Jenson Button, and indeed for Paul Di Resta, who currently sits in 11th place, behind Rubens Barrichello, who is showing why he is a very, very good driver in the wet. He's now gone up from 19th on the grid to 10th, so we've got a Renault in the points. And we've got Matthias Lauda in 9th place as well. So, Matthias Lauda not doing too badly, but he has got Rubens Barrichello all over the back of him. The gap between those two, pretty much nothing. If you want a gap, it's 1/10 of a second, 1/10.5 to be a bit more pedantic. There is Barrichello we're looking at as he locks up going into the foggy S's. Actually, Lauda is, how far is he behind Perez? Well, he's just 0.3 of a second behind Perez, so Perez has got his mirrors full of a Honda and a Renault. Mark Webber 4.1 seconds behind Jenson Button. 7 seconds ahead of Kimi Raikkonen, so that gap is definitely coming down. There goes the McLaren through the Starkey corners, and he's got the gap down by another 1/10, 6.9 seconds, the gap between Webber and Raikkonen, as we continue to stare at two marshals just looking at the action. We're also looking at what looks like an Iveco lorry with a big crane attached to the back of it. I'm just trying to have a look at the field going through the old hairpin. There goes a Williams. There goes Bianchi through the shot, and there's a Ferrari rejoining from the old hairpin, so somebody, one of those two has had an off. I think it's Perez actually. He's dropped way down the order, so Perez having an off at the old hairpin, and that's put Matthias Lauda up to 8th place, Barrichello 9th, and off the track goes Perez again, so that's a really bad lap for Sergio Perez as he goes through, is that McLaren's? Yeah, I think it's McLaren's. And now Coppice. Onto the back straight goes the Mexican driver, having gone from 8th place to 13th, 15th even, so he's now behind Fernando Alonso. Back to the brick wall, and you can see it is still wet and grey. Maybe with some hints of beige and brown as well. And the Agip signs going through the bridge, because you need some sponsors to advertise products. There is a Vauxhall being advertised on the left as well, as through the old hairpin goes one of the McLarens. It must be Kimi Räikkönen. He's got a nice bit of clear track between himself and Takuma. In fact, that was Kamui Kobayashi, because he's got a nice bit of clear track as well. He is 10.5 seconds ahead of Matthias Lauda, who we are on board with in 8th place. And Kobayashi definitely got the measure of the Austrian driver as we go through Coppice corner. And look at that, Barrichello around the outside of him. Good move, Rubens. I think Lauda got a bit sideways going through the first apex of Coppice, and that loss of momentum has led Rubens Barrichello to go through in 8th place, back to the brick wall. And you can see there's a little coat hanger there, or it might well be the crane, just displaying its accessories beneath the grey beige brick wall. Used to be a much larger, much longer brick wall, but then they've taken most of it down, and have since taken off the Dunlop signs as well. That's down the back straight between Coppice and the Fogarty S's, as Nico Hülkenberg now in 19th place. So again, bad race for BMW Sauber, because Montoya is out and Hülkenberg not having a good race again. Had a pretty dreadful time of it in Austria, and then both BMW Saubers out of the points at Silverstone. Again, I must reiterate, that's a bit of a tricky time for them. Back to the brick wall, and you can just about see the action through the old hairpin there. There goes one of the Williamses through the old hairpin. And I think it must be Jules Bianchi. He must be ahead of teammate Nick Heidfeld. Heidfeld did have that off at the old hairpin. There goes the other Williams with a Super Gurry behind. It's Nick Heidfeld in 13th place at the moment, so he has recovered some of that, and Bianchi is indeed ahead of the German. Bianchi in 12th, Heidfeld 13th, and behind Heidfeld is the Super Gurry. It is Fernando Alonso, because we got Felipe Massa up in 11th place. Paul Di Resta's into the points. He could get his first points of the season if he stays like that. Look at that, Alonso having a look at the inside of Nick Heidfeld going into the Fogarty S's. Don't think he managed to make that one stick, as through goes... That's Takuma Sato with Hamilton, not that far behind him. He's only 1.4 seconds behind the Japanese driver. And the gaps at the front definitely closing. Webber has now got the gap down between himself and Button to 3.1 seconds. It's now 3.7. Webber just lost a lot of time in a sector somewhere, and Kimi Räikkönen, as a result, has gained 4/10 in that sector. And Räikkönen 5.2 seconds behind Australian Mark Webber. And Sato doing what he can to try and keep up with those top three, but the Honda's not particularly quick in the wet. 8.1 seconds behind Kimi Räikkönen, Hamilton 1.5 seconds behind Sato. And in 6th place you've got Christian Albers in the Force India, Kobayashi 7th, and quite a way ahead of Rubens Barrichello in 8th place, 11.4 seconds, just updated then. Matthias Lauda 2 seconds behind Rubens Barrichello, and Paul Di Resta in 10th place, 2.3 seconds behind Matthias Lauda at the moment. But Di Resta has got Felipe Massa in close company, just 0.8 of a second behind. You can see in the background Sato and Hamilton through the old hairpin and through Starkey's. And the track definitely not drying out at this stage, so constant rain at Donington Park. It may dry out later on, but for the moment, quite a lot of puddles out there, and maybe that's why drivers are being caught out at the old hairpin. There's a particularly large puddle that's causing them to aquaplane off the circuit. Haven't seen one for quite a while, so it looks as if the drivers are now getting used to the wet conditions. I say that, Perez was having trouble turning into Redgate Corner, as he is a fair bit down the order, but Ferrari's not having good races once again. And through the old hairpin, no problem, and gone are the yellow flags, so now we can resume racing properly at the exit of the old hairpin. That took a long time to clear those two cars up out of harm's way, so now we can look at some cars. And a blimp on the top right. It looks as if it's been sponsored by Sega. Sega, the main title sponsor, it seems, for the European Grand Prix at Donington Park. with Sonic the Hedgehog looking at it from the outside. Well, at the moment the two Toyotas are running rings on the field, with Button first and Webber second. But Kimi Raikkonen is the driver to watch out for at the moment. He's now less than 5 seconds behind Webber. It is 4.8 seconds between those two. On board with the Toyota of said Webber. That is not Raikkonen immediately behind, that is a lapped Hülkenberg. As we switch to Rubens Barrichello, and now switching to Lewis Hamilton, 5th place, still chasing Sato. Sato still losing time to Raikkonen, but he's some 2 seconds ahead of Hamilton now, so Sato not doing too badly. Could be getting used to his car now, in these wet conditions. New fastest lap for Kimi Raikkonen, so that's a 1:17.6 for the Flying Finn, as he continues to close the gap between himself and Webber, as that is Di Resta versus Massa into the foggy S's, and I think Massa might well have done it. He had the high ground through the exit, and that's a position gain for the Super Aguri driver. Now up to 10th place, as we watch. That's being lapped by off the track. Look at that, the Ferrari spinning just about pretty much, and he's going to rejoin right into the path of Webber, nearly hitting the Australian. That could have been bad. But yeah, it looked like the Ferrari of Glock was scared off the circuit by Button at Coppice corner, and then getting sideways, and then nearly taking Webber out completely. Suttle getting a lot of understeer going into the Goddard's hairpin, the final corner of the circuit, as he sits in 15th place between Fernando Alonso there in front of him, and behind him the Ferrari. It could be Glock, it could be Perez. Pits, that's Kimi Raikkonen making a pit stop from 3rd place. So that's an explanation as to why he was closing in on the two Toyotas. He had less fuel, and Sato, well, that doesn't really say much for his race pace if he's pitting at the same time. And Lewis Hamilton and Christian Albers. We've got lots of pit stops happening at the moment. 3rd through to 6th. And Kobayashi in as well, so both McLarens in exactly the same time. That's interesting. So I wonder why that is. Is the track changing, and is it getting drier? I suppose we'll find out in due course, but in the meantime there's contact between 3 drivers. Look at that, Heidfeld, Alonso and Suttle, and that has put Heidfeld off the track, and he's going to drop down the order with that as well. So I wonder why McLaren were taking the double stacking option, because you wouldn't normally do that. So he's got more yellow flags, so who has gone off the circuit somewhere? And look at that, more pit stops happening. Alonso into the pits, and somebody else, and look at that, who is? It's Kimi Raikkonen! Kimi Raikkonen off the circuit of the old hairpin. And who else is that gone with him as well? That is the remains of Ricciardo and Montoya. So obviously cold tyres or getting caught out by puddles on the circuit. But yeah, Kimi Raikkonen, that's shot his race completely as he rejoins. Well, it's in 10th place. It's not as bad as thought, actually, but still bad enough that he's not going to challenge for the win, it seems. So yeah, lots of pit stops happening, and I wonder if that was fuel or if it's the circuit changing, because both Toyotas are staying out for the moment. And we got Rubens Barrichello up in 3rd place. That's a nice little tonic for himself, as he comes into the pits, actually. So Rubens Barrichello briefly in 3rd, but now he's going to drop down probably to 7th or 8th place once all these pit stops are done. And Di Resta into the pits as well. So Kimi Raikkonen's off. That's going to put Takuma Sato in 3rd place. That's going to put Hamilton up into 4th place, Albers up into 5th. And is that going to put Kobayashi up into 6th place in the McLaren? And what about Kimi Raikkonen? Is he going to stay ahead of Rubens Barrichello once they've all made their pit stops? Well, he gets ahead of Bianchi, and is he going to get a Di Resta? He is. Is he going to get Barrichello as well? Not quite. So Rubens Barrichello gaining from Raikkonen's mistake, as Jenson Button now comes into the pits from the race lead. That'll put Mark Webber into the lead briefly, but he has got a pit stop coming up. So they're making their pit stops from lap 24, 25, 6 and 7. So does that suggest an early 2-stop strategy, or maybe a late 3-stop? I suspect it's going to be a two-stop strategy in terms of fuel. And I'd be interested to know what tyres everyone's taken as well. Especially if both McLarens pitted on the same lap as each other, double stacking. And Rubens only just rejoined ahead of Kimi Räikkönen because that is just 2/10 the gap between those two. Now Kimi was flying a bit in the wet conditions, so I'd perhaps expect him to maintain his push. So maybe he can still get a podium finish, but he's made his job very, very difficult. And Timo Glock, that's intermediate tyres he is on, so it does seem as if the track is changing a little bit, and maybe the teams are favouring the intermediate tyres as into the Fogarty S's. That is Button putting a lap on the Ferrari there of Sergio Perez. Suttle in 16th as well. He's way down the order, probably not going to battle for points as Mark Webber comes into the pits from the race lead. Now, it'd be dream ticket if Button can stay ahead of Mark Webber, because he is the championship leader, and Toyota may at this stage be looking to shift championship focus, but depends if they've told Mark Webber that, as Rubens Barrichello goes through the Coppice corner. Didn't look like the best of lines he took through there, and that's going to put him under pressure from Kimi Räikkönen, who's trying to get up the inside into the foggy, and I think Kimi's got him up the inside. Forceful move from the Finn as he starts his recovery drive. And I think Webber has jumped him. Yes, Webber has jumped Jenson Button in the pit stops. So, not quite dream ticket for Toyota, because Jenson Button is down to second place. And, well, he'll still be extending the championship lead if he finishes there, but for himself, he'd want the race win. And especially if he can make it 2 in a row in front of his home crowd. Well, I'm trying to work out who is closest to Donington, actually, out of the 3 British drivers, because you've got Stevenage, which is somewhere between Peterborough and London, and then Button is from Frome, I think you pronounce it, in Somerset, and that's to the left and quite a bit down of Donington, so who knows which one of those two towns is closer. So into McLaren's comes Matthias Lauda. He is running in 9th place between Rubens Barrichello and Felipe Massa, so he's in a Brazilian sandwich. Wonder what sort of flavouring a Brazilian sandwich would be. Through Hollywood, but now we switch to Kubica, and I think he's going through Starkey's, and now into McLaren's himself. Oh my goodness, the 2 Toyotas have hit each other! That's a big one, and it's hard to see, but wheels off, so at least one of them has gone. Which one is it? Well, there's one of them spinning round, so that one at least has gotten away with it, and Mark Webber is the one that's out of the race. So the 2 Toyotas amazingly have come into each other. So it's Jenson Button, who's still in the race, and looking to try and rejoin. Is he going to rejoin ahead of Sato? It's going to be close, but Sato's just taken the lead of the race. So what drama on lap 29 of the race through the old hairpin. I was not expecting that at all, and obviously Jenson Button was the one having a go at Mark Webber because he was running in 2nd place, but obviously either a bit too late, as off the track and out of the race of retirement of mechanical issue goes Nick Heidfeld, and he's lost a wheel in the process. So mechanical issues putting him straight into the wall. Is anybody in it going to hit that tyre? We've seen it quite a few times this season. And by the way, that was a new fastest lap for Kimi Räikkönen, now in 6th place, and it was a gearbox, and there's somebody hitting the tyre. That was Nico Hülkenberg, so he's just missed the pit lane entrance as well, so he's got to do an entire lap before coming into the pits for a new front wing. So Hülkenberg having a mare as he hits compatriot Heidfeld's tyre, and there was another driver into the pits as well with no front wing. It looked like a Super Aguri. All kicking off on lap 29 of the race, as off the track goes Sergio Perez. He's hidden in the bridge, so he's had a spin at the old hairpin. I think that's his 2nd of the day. If not, then both Ferraris have made it 1 each. Yeah, he's stuck in the gravel at the moment, trying to rejoin. So, goodness me, what's that done for the race? So, Sato now leads by 1.6 seconds from Jenson Button, the incredibly lucky Jenson Button. I know I suspect the incredibly sheepish Jenson Button because, again, as I said before, he was the one making the move on Webber into the old hairpin. Looked like it might have been from a bit too far back and could be going too quickly into that corner as well, as Sergio Perez is making an absolute dog's breakfast of rejoining the circuit, as he's now the wrong way in the gravel trap, and could be that his engine's getting a bit too hot and they might be told to switch it off sometime soon. Suppose we'll keep an eye on that for a bit, but I'm keeping an eye out on the timing screens as Raikkonen overtakes Kamui Kobayashi for 5th place, and now he's going to try and do chase. Kobayashi losing another position to Rubens Barrichello. So something happened to Kobayashi as Hülkenberg has made it into the pits. And Barrichello, well, he's ahead of Kobayashi, but let's keep an eye out on the Japanese driver and the timing screens. Make sure he's not had an off somewhere. As Perez's Ferrari gets wheeled away. Been a miserable season for Ferrari, and this won't help them one bit. Kobayashi's still out there, so I think Raikkonen's overtake on Kobayashi was a tad aggressive maybe, and that has put Rubens Barrichello past the Japanese driver as well. But in any case, Sato from Button, what's the gap between those two? It is some 8 and a bit tenths of a second, and Hamilton is 4.5 seconds behind Button. Now we got 2 Brits on the podium, thanks to the big shunt of Mark Webber that he had through the old hairpin, and there's going to be words between the two Toyotas as into the Melbourne hairpin. Button having a look. We switch away at the worst possible moments because we're going to see Paul di Resta having a look at, well, he's trying to put a lap on Hülkenberg, the hapless Hülkenberg, who's, well, as I mentioned before, having a mare of a race. But yeah, Jenson Button, he's still behind Sato, so he didn't make that overtake stick, but now he's trying to look at the Japanese driver around the outside on the pit straight. We switch away once again for some reason to look at somebody well out of the points, and in 13th place, we should be looking at the lead battle. Takuma Sato versus Jenson Button. Going through Hollywood, now into Carrera Curves, and Jenson Button having a look at the inside there, and again, he's, even despite shunting his teammate out of the race, he's no short of bravery. In fact, that might well have seemed to have spurred him on a bit. Yeah, Jenson wants passed because he wants to rebuild that lead that he lost to teammate Mark Webber as Sato wrenches the wheel right, and Button's taken advantage of that at Coppice Corner. So Jenson Button now back in the race lead. Very luckily, I have to say. But yeah, turning left into Foggy, and then right out of Foggy, Jenson Button in the lead. And that's Kimi Raikkonen making his way past some traffic. And he's catching Christian Albers. He'd set another new fastest lap now into the 1:16s. As we look at Robert Kubica, 12th place in the Renault, chasing Paul di Resta 11th. And now, Lauda versus Massa. So Lauda not quite in the Brazilian sandwich anymore because there is a new filling, and that is the Japanese of Kamui Kobayashi in 7th place behind the Renault driver. And Kobayashi not quite quick at this stage, he's 2.5 seconds behind Rubens. So Rubens is just having a very good race in the wet, as through Hollywood goes Lewis Hamilton in 3rd place, 4.5 seconds behind Sato. And there's your race leader Button, 1 second. Is that going to go up a bit? It's gone up a lot, 1.6 seconds in that one sector alone. So Toyota's working quite well in the wet conditions, although getting slightly drier because everyone is now on the intermediate tyres. They all started on the full wets, but obviously the track is losing some of its puddles. And who knows, in the next few laps you may see a dry line emerge, and which means that drivers will be back into the pits for some slick tyres. Through the foggy S's goes Hamilton, and there into the Melbourne hairpin goes Sato, getting it very, very sideways, going into the Melbourne hairpin, trying to use the back ends to steer the car into that corner, like a go-kart. But not really working for him at the moment because he's losing time to Jenson Button, who sets a new fastest lap. 1:16.839 that was. So he's trying to push hard. As through Starkeys goes Timo Glock, 14th place behind Adrian Sutil, catching up to the Force India driver. And now through Starkey's himself goes Jenson Button, race leader. So he's nearly a full lap ahead of Timo Glock, and that just shows you the performance difference between all drivers in this race. Due to the conditions, due to car performance, but due to quite a lot of incidents and spins at the old hairpin. And that's Fernando Alonso in 15th place at the moment. Surprising, really, considering his depth of talent. Where did he finish in the last race? At Silverstone. Where was he? Fernando Alonso was 7th. He got 6 points out of that one. So at least he's getting his season together somewhat, but at the moment it is his teammate in 9th place in the points. As we look at Paul Di Resta, 11th place, he's quite a way behind Jules Bianchi in 10th place. 15.4 seconds. That's another new fastest lap for Button, 1:16.832. And one of the last to pit for intermediate tyres, so there'll be a few laps or so younger than quite a lot of the drivers in the field. Particularly Kimi Raikkonen, he was one of the first, in fact he was the first to pit for some new intermediate tyres. And Di Resta's just lost 11th place to Robert Kubica. You can see the change there. So now Kubica is the one who's going to try and chase after Jules Bianchi in 10th place. And Jenson Button's positively storming away from Takuma Sato as Christian Albers has lost 4th place to Kimi Raikkonen. Now Kimi has got ahead of the Force India driver. Kimi flying at this stage as through McLaren's goes Albers and Barrichello. Barrichello really catching up to the Force India who got wrong-footed at the old hairpin. And Barrichello going to try and use what he can of some slipstream going down the back straight, and I think he was in good shape to overtake Albers. Is that a dry line emerging at the exit of Foggy? Well, we'll find out later on as we look at Hulkenberg in 16th place. Just trying to work out how many retirements there have been so far. I think there have been 6, so that would make Hulkenberg the last of the runners, because there's a new fastest lap for Jenson Button, by the way. So who have we had retire from the race? We've had Montoya and Ricciardo retire from the race, and we've had Perez and Webber retire from the race as well, all at the old hairpin, and then 2 drivers retiring with mechanical issues. One was Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull, and the other one was Nick Heidfeld with a transmission failure. Probably a gearbox, because you wouldn't really stress the drive shafts too much on the wet conditions. Maybe some water's mixed in with the gearbox oil, perhaps. As through McLaren's and coming out of it, and we switch to Starkey's where we see Christian Albers trying to defend his position from Rubens Barrichello, now through McLaren's and then into Coppice. I think the track's actually getting a bit wetter because we're starting to see some new puddles form at Coppice Corner. You can see the change between the darker grey and the reflective grey on the tarmac. It does suggest that there's some water falling down from the sky. Barrichello has taken Albers, by the way, as Button sets another new fastest lap. And he's got the gap out between himself and Sato to over 8 seconds now. So again, Sato not comfortable in these wet conditions, despite taking the lead briefly. Matthias Lauda has just taken Kamui Kobayashi for 7th place. So we've now got both Hondas in the top 7. And at the moment they're the best performing team with 2nd and 7th. As look at that, Massa taking Kobayashi into Coppice Corner. Or is that Redgate? I think it's Redgate actually. So that's at the start of the lap. Massa taking 8th off of Kobayashi, who's struggling a little bit for whatever reason. Sato in 2nd. As off the track goes Kobayashi in a very big way at the old hairpin. That will be. So we've got one McLaren in the gravel trap, just as his teammate was at one point earlier in the race. And he's a long way off into the gravel trap as well, but not beached, crucially. So he's going to wait until another driver gets past. This will be Kubica. A few more drivers to overtake. There's one of them, Di Resta, and this will be Kobayashi finally rejoining. So he's in 12th place now, as we look at Jenson Button going into Redgate, and then back to the recovering Kobayashi. So he was struggling at that point with his intermediate tyres. He'd pit on the same lap as Kimi Raikkonen. But Kimi Raikkonen's not struggling because he's now less than a second behind Lewis Hamilton. And Alonso looking to try and get up the inside of one of the Force Indias. This will be... Who is that actually? Because we've got Albers in 6th, and then Adrian Sutil. Adrian Sutil must have been the driver to come into the pits with broken front wing damage from the debris of Heidfeld. And we need to be seeing the battle for 3rd place between Hamilton and Raikkonen, because that gap is pretty much nothing now. So somewhere Kimi Raikkonen's going to have a go at Sato. Is he going to do it into the foggy S's? Well, he's having a look. Hamilton in the middle of the circuit, but Kimi Raikkonen having none of that, and he's up into 3rd place. Now his next target is Takuma Sato in the Honda in front of him. How much has he got to make up? He's got 7.2 seconds to make up. He'd actually lost 1.1 seconds, overtaking Hamilton at the foggy S's, as Matthias Lauda just passes Christian Albers for 6th place. So although Sato's not that comfortable in the wet, Matthias Lauda's having a very good drive at the moment because he's making his way up the field and nicely up to 6th place. He's got 8.5 seconds between himself and Rubens Barrichello. And where did Lauda qualify actually? Because he was 13th on the grid, so good drive from Lauda. Even better one for Rubens Barrichello though, started 19th, now up to 5th. And staying out of trouble, and look at that, Albers under pressure from Massa up the inside. Now that makes a change from Adelaide, because particularly we saw in the last stint of that race, Felipe Massa really struggling on his full wet tyres, so Massa performing quite well with the intermediate Shod Superguri at Donington Park. And through McLaren's goes Matthias Lauda as we switch to 10th place Kubica, so we have got both Renaults in the points. And that would have been thanks to Kobayashi's off as Sonic watches from the crowd. Through McLaren's goes Kubica. Meanwhile up at the front, Raikkonen really catching up to Takuma Sato, and he's 5.2 seconds behind the Japanese driver. As we look at the flying Finn exiting Goddard's corner, and what does he get the gap down to? Gets it down to 5 seconds as he finishes that lap with a new fastest lap of 1 minute 16.5 for Kimi Raikkonen. So he's 17.1 seconds behind Jenson Button, and it'd be hard to say how much time Raikkonen actually lost with that spin of the old hairpin, but it was definitely more than 17 seconds because, well, as we saw, the two Toyotas had that major incident. They were 20 seconds ahead of Takuma Sato at that point, so absolutely no need for them to go into battle at that point. But anyway, still got one of them in the lead. As off the track at the old hairpin goes Christian Albers. He should be able to rejoin from that, no problem. And you can see the camera moving in conjunction with his car movement. But he has lost 8th place to Jules Bianchi. He's going to lose another one to Kubica. And is he going to lose another one to Paul Di Resta? Well, he's lost one to Hulkenberg, but that's to unlap himself. There goes Di Resta up to 10th place. So both Force Indias now out of the points, as Raikkonen turns into Goddard's corner. Brief look at his teammate now in 12th place. Right behind Christian Albers now, so both of these two may well do battle as Albers recovers. Kubica locking up his fronts going into the foggy S's. And then out of the foggy S's, he can try and regain his composure into the Melbourne hairpin. No problems there. So, 13.5 seconds now the gap between, well, hang on, 14.4 seconds between Button and Sato, as Kimi Raikkonen continues to close in on the Honda driver as Button turns into the foggy S's, expertly hit both apexes nicely. He'll be facing a stern word at the end of the race from either his team boss or from what should be a very angry Mark Webber after that collision. Whoa, goodness me, Lauda spinning and another driver off as well, so Lauda trying to overtake somebody, overdid it. Now that's put Felipe Massa up to 6th, Bianchi up to 7th, Lauda down to 8th. And Jenson Button responding to the threat of Kimi Raikkonen by setting a new fastest lap of his own, as Barrichello's just taken 4th place off of Lewis Hamilton somewhere. Now, is that going through the foggy S's? Could well have been, because... well, it could have been going into the Melbourne hairpin, who knows. Well, anyway, Rubens Barrichello up to 4th in the Renault, and cementing just what a solid drive he's been having, as that's Kobayashi ahead of Christian Albers now, and now Albers has got his own teammate to deal with. And behind those two, you've got Timo Glock in the Ferrari, as braking into foggy S's. But we switch to McLaren's, as Sato has now got Kimi Raikkonen right behind him. There's Rubens Barrichello, 8 seconds behind Raikkonen, so I don't think he's got the measure of the Finn, but he has got a podium on his sights if Sato continues to struggle. That was Massa going through the Starkey's corners, and he's about to lap his own teammate. Alonso's having a dreadful race. Maybe it was him that came into the pits. I think it did look like a Super Guri that lost his front wing against the debris of Heidfeld's smash into the wall. So yeah, dreadful time of it for Alonso, as through Hollywood go the 2 Force Indias. Sutil now ahead of Albers, who's probably struggling with old tyres. I'd quite like to be having a look at the battle for second now between Sato and Raikkonen, because they're just 2 tenths. And in fact, Raikkonen gets him. He gets him into Redgate. That's at the start of the lap. So now Kimi Raikkonen, that was pretty quick that he'd caught up to Sato and then quickly overtaking him, so not much time lost for the Finn as he goes through the old hairpin and starts to eke the gap between himself and Sato. What's the gap between himself and Button? 18.4 seconds pretty much, as Hamilton goes off the track at the old hairpin. That was from 5th place, but luckily for him he keeps forward momentum and remains in 5th place. But Massa will be quite a bit closer now. That's unusual for Hamilton, he's normally quite good in the wet. And he lost 7 seconds in that little off at the old hairpin. Massa ahead of Alonso, that's to put the lap on him. There's your last runner, Nico Hülkenberg in 16th place. Going through the old hairpin, no problems there, but how far is he behind Fernando Alonso? 25.3 seconds, so pretty much no hope of points for the BMW Sauber team. But anyway, and Raikkonen 17.7 seconds behind Button, so 6 tenths he took out of the Brit on that lap. Maybe in those last 2 sectors actually, because yeah, the first sector point after the old hairpin, let's see him turn right, very, very quick corner, not even a hairpin really. Could have been a hairpin in the olden days. There's Christian Albers, he's being lapped now by Button, so that would explain why Button lost a bit of time to Raikkonen on that last lap. Button's in quite a bit of traffic at the moment. Now he's in a Force India sandwich. Subtle behind, Albers in front, and there's a Ferrari quite close as well. Must still be raining a little bit because the track's not exactly drying out at this stage. But everyone seems pretty happy enough on the intermediate tyres. Now I'll be wondering when drivers will be pitting for their second stops. This will be for fuel, as Albers getting it all crossed up going into Redgate corner. As he tries to hang on to the field in front of him. New fastest lap for Raikkonen, 1:16.313, so the track conditions remaining stable at the moment. But the fastest laps are only really going down, or new fastest laps that are being set, only going down by hundredths. So yeah, I would say that there is still a bit of rain falling on the Donington Park circuit, but it's only light, so drivers can stay out on the intermediate tyres and live with it. But yeah, the pit stops happened in the late 20s, and I imagine like up to 50 laps would be too long a stint for these tyres and the fuel, so yeah, we'd expect drivers to be making one more pit stop. That's Lewis Hamilton, who's just lost a position to Felipe Massa, so the Brazilian now up to 5th, so the Brazilians going very well in these wet conditions. They're 4th and 5th at the moment. And Barrichello's 4 seconds behind Takuma Sato, definitely catching up. That's just updated, 3.6 seconds behind Sato. We could be seeing Barrichello get on the podium, and that will certainly help Button and Raikkonen's championship chances, because Sato sits second at the moment, and lost points for the Japanese driver would certainly not do them any good. New fastest lap for Raikkonen once again, 1 minute 16.1 this time. We're nearly into the 15s. Track continuing to dry out a little bit perhaps. Well, who knows, we may see a dry line emerge at some point as Button puts the lap on Kamui Kobayashi in 11th place as he spins it because Kobayashi got too wide, a bit too generous perhaps in letting Button through, and that's going to put a couple of other drivers a lap ahead. In fact, no, that was for position. Suttle and Glock taking the position off of the Japanese driver. And Barrichello less than 3 seconds now behind Sato. Sato turned into Coppice there, and Barrichello now doing the same. That's how close it is. Albers versus Glock for 11th place into the Melbourne hairpin, and Glock the quicker driver at this stage, but Albers the wider one. That's the battle for 12th place at the moment. There's Kubica going through Starkies, and how far is he behind Matthias Lauda? It's 7.2 seconds, the gap, so Kubica doing a good job, but not quite as good as Rubens Barrichello, the flying Rubens Barrichello, who's got a podium in his sights. Hulkenberg continuing to lose time to Fernando Alonso, so let's not bother with him, but there's some airtime nonetheless. And there's now 30 laps to go. Jenson Button 15.3 seconds ahead of Kimi Raikkonen now. We're looking at Raikkonen's teammate going through McLaren's corner. A lot of people in the crowd. So they've come to watch this race, braving the good old British weather. And at the moment they're seeing 2 of their drivers in the top 6, but all of them in the top 10, so 3 Brits in the points. Sato being chased by Barrichello underneath the what used to be the Dunlop Bridge, but now at the moment it's the Vauxhall Bridge. As Kimi Raikkonen turns into Melbourne hairpin, and he's 15.1 seconds behind Jenson Button, race leader. Kubica continuing to chase Lauda for 8th place, as Lewis Hamilton has got Jules Bianchi all over him going into the foggy S's. That's a battle for position, and Lewis Hamilton definitely struggling at the moment, probably with his tyres, could be with his setup. But Hamilton seemed quite quick in the early stage of the race on the full wet tyres, so yeah, maybe Hamilton went for a wetter setup than this and hoping that the track would remain sodden, but at the moment everyone on the intermediates, and yeah, it could be that the Red Bull is overheating its tyres a bit. Christian Albers going through Coppice now, as he has now got Timo Glock ahead of him, so Glock has made the overtake stick. And who's next on Albers' hit list? It's Kobayashi coming through as Sato versus Barrichello. Sato, very slow run through the first apex of Coppice, underneath the Campari Vauxhall Bridge, and now into Foggy. And there's not a lot of runoff there between the Foggy S's and the Goddard's corner, so yeah, you don't want to outbrake yourself there, otherwise you're going straight into a wall of tyres. That's 7th place Jules Bianchi, and he's looking round the outside. He was at the inside of the Foggy S's. That is 6th place for Jules Bianchi. So we've now got a Williams up to 6th place, and with Heidfeld out due to a mechanical issue, that is pretty good news for them. To see Jules Bianchi driving very well in this race. Christian Albers going through the old hairpin, then Starkies, and he's still struggling a little bit, so maybe I got the same problem as Lewis Hamilton. And oh, he's way off the track, understeering off the track at McLaren's, and that's going to put Raikkonen a lap ahead, and then Kobayashi getting a bit closer. Jenson Button about to lap Paul Di Resta, so the top 10 all on the lead lap at the moment. But soon to be top 9 if the rest is about to be lapped. Felipe Massa in 5th place at the moment, and he's now 11 seconds ahead of, well, he's behind Rubens Barrichello, who's still looking for that 3rd place of Takuma Sato's. On board with the Japanese driver as he continues to drop back from Kimi Raikkonen as Bianchi has a lock-up going into the foggy S's, and that's going to give Hamilton an opportunity to retake that 6th place as into the pits comes Kamui Kobayashi. That is a pit stop for the Japanese driver. Looks pretty much on target for a 2-stop strategy. First he came in on lap 25, and Barrichello's taken Sato for 3rd place. Rubens Barrichello now to the podium places. That was at Redgate Corner because they're going through Hollywood and Craner. And Alba's also going through Hollywood and... this is through McLean's actually. And now through Coppice goes the Dutchman. So now Jenson Button leading from Kimi Raikkonen, and now 3rd place Rubens Barrichello in the Renault. Could get Renault's 2nd podium of the season. As through Foggy goes Christian Albers, 13th, chasing Timo Glock for 12th, but Glock was the quicker driver at that point. And now what we've got, Jules Bianchi versus Lewis Hamilton versus Matthias Lauda. 3-way battle for 3rd, and that is a lapped Alonso. So yeah, let's keep an eye out on what tyres that Kamui Kobayashi has gone for. We may get an outboard or onboard shot of the Japanese driver as into the pits comes Rubens Barrichello, so his moment of glory ahead of Takuma Sato lasting just 1 lap because he's in the pits. And again, keep an eye on what tyres he takes on. If he takes on a new set of intermediates, then that is a surefire fuel stop with some new intermediate tyres, but if it's full wets then it means that the track is getting wetter, and if it's slicks that is suicidal. As Gio Bianchi into the pits as well, so that's his 2nd pit stop. We continue to look at Christian Albers, that was exiting McLean's, now into Coppice Corner. And he'll be aching for a new set of tyres, as will Lewis Hamilton, because both of those drivers particularly struggling at the circuit at the moment. And that is dry tyres for Kobayashi, well that's surprising, so I don't know if that's a bit of a gamble or if the track is drying out, but Jenson Button setting a new fastest lap on the intermediate tyres. So that is a reckless gamble for Kamui Kobayashi, but anyway, his teammate is into the pits from 2nd place. What tyres is he going to take on? Well, through Hollywood it still looks pretty wet through there. And through the old hairpin. Yeah, keep an eye out for any dry lines emerging, but yeah, that looks way too soon for dry tyres. And Massa into the pits as well, as Rubens Barrichello puts a lap on Fernando Alonso. So yeah, got some strange developments happening because you can still see there's a lot of spray going on. But Barrichello turning left. But yet there is a slight dry line beginning to emerge at the exit of the foggy S's, but the rest of the circuit is still fundamentally wet. So yeah, very brave to take on some dry tyres was Kobayashi. And well, I'm going to assume that some of the other drivers are doing the same thing. Anyway, well, let's see how this works out for Kobayashi. As out of Redgate goes Massa. Yeah, that's dry tyres as well for the Superguri. Call them dry, call them groove, but they're definitely not slicks because they've got those grooves in them. Could call them cut slicks if you really wanted to, but let's call them dry tyres. So, into McLean's goes Massa. Well, let's see how they cope on these dry grooved tyres. And we'll keep an eye out on the gaps as well between, well, particularly Raikkonen and Button and Raikkonen and Sato as well, because I'm going to assume that they're now making pit stops for dry tyres. Kobayashi is still on the intermediate tyres at the moment. Is he going to peel into the pits? Well, depends where he is at the moment. Christian Albers going through the shot at Starkey's, now into McLean's. Well, he's sticking with the intermediate tyres, which for me do seem as if they're the right tyres to be on. And those are dry tyres for Kimi Raikkonen, but well, he's starting to make them work actually. He's closed now under 10 seconds from Takuma Sato. And yeah, there may well be a bit of a dry line emerging at the exit of McLaren's corner. So eventually this track is going to dry out. We got Jenson Button into the pits from the race lead. He's turning right through, I think that's McLaren's corner. You can just about see the dry line beginning to emerge there for looking at Robert Kubica. And he's currently in 7th place, still on the intermediate tyres. And he's gone round the outside to put a lap on somebody. Probably Nico Hulkenberg. He is a fair way down the order. Dry tyres for Jenson Button, so looks as if this is probably the right moment to switch, even though the track does still look a bit wet in places. Raikkonen some 9.6 seconds behind Sato. And Sato not pitting just yet. I don't think he has pitted anyway. And I think that's Sato. Well, let's keep an eye out on it. But yeah, Sato's still out in the intermediates. 8.8 seconds behind Jenson Button and 9.6 ahead of Kimi Raikkonen as Matthias Lauda. I think he's just overtaken Lewis Hamilton for 4th place there. So now got both Hondas in the top 4. So that'll do their Constructors' Championship bid quite a bit of good. As Hulkenberg in last goes through to start a new lap. Now is he on the intermediates? I think they looked like intermediate tyres. Yeah, still on the intermediates, but those are grooved dry tyres for Felipe Massa going through Starkey's corner. And at the moment it looks like the intermediates are still the right tyre to be on, because Kubica was half a second quicker than Massa going through that particular sector point, and Kubica himself is looking to try and overtake Rubens Barrichello for 6th place. I think Barrichello on dry tyres, and Hamilton still on intermediates, I think, and so is Matthias Lauda and Takuma Sato. But Sato, oddly enough, was the quicker of those top 3 drivers. In fact, no, he wasn't. Kimi Raikkonen was quicker, so I think Jenson's actually the slowest of the top 3 at the moment, but that'll be on new dry tyres. And not quite as much spray from that shot, but from the outboard shot there is still definitely a bit of spray coming out at the back of Raikkonen's tyres. And he's really closing in on Sato actually on this particular lap, so starting to come up to temperature now, but both Hondas sticking with the intermediates for now as Lauda turns right at McLaren's. And he's 15 seconds behind Kimi Raikkonen. He's 2 seconds ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And Kimi Raikkonen, he is 8.5 seconds behind Takuma Sato now. And now Button's dry tyres beginning to come up to working temperature, because he is nearly 10 seconds ahead of Sato as Kubica takes a place off of Rubens Barrichello. So Kubica's intermediates still working quite well at this stage of the race, but Kubica a lot lighter on fuel now compared to his Brazilian teammate. And continuing for another lap is Kubica, so he's pretty happy out there. P2 Sato, P13 Albers, and just looking at some of the other runners at the moment. Well, let's go through an order actually, with 20 or so laps to go. It's Jenson Button leading by 10.2 seconds from Takuma Sato, and Kimi Raikkonen third, 8.4 seconds behind Sato. But Button dry tyres, Sato intermediates, Raikkonen dry tyres, Lauda in 4th at the moment, intermediate tyres, Hamilton 5th, also intermediates, Kubica 6th, intermediates. Then we've got Barrichello, Massa, all on dry tyres, and I think Kubica, in fact, Bianchi is on dry tyres as well, 9th place in the Williams. Suttle 10th at the moment, and could still be on intermediate tyres. And that's Joe Bianchi having a big off at the old hairpin, and that has cost him a lot of time, probably some points as well, because he's lost those positions to Suttle, Glock and De Resta. And there could be another one if Kobayashi comes through, but that is Jenson Button to put a lap on the Williams driver. It's Christian Albers gone through in 12th place, but rejoining is Joe Bianchi, so that'll frustrate the Williams team as he blocks Takuma Sato very, very badly at Starkeys, and that's going to help Kimi Raikkonen. And there is a dry line now emerging at McLaren's corner, so yeah, the dry tyres are going to come into their own, and those that are still in the intermediates will have to come in for some dry tyres. Yep, definitely dry line emerging, so depends how well the early switch works, but there's Kimi Raikkonen making good use of his, and he is 6.8 seconds behind Takuma Sato now, as Felipe Massa in 8th place. 8.5 seconds behind Rubens Barrichello, and losing a tenth or two per sector. But it's still Kubica making his intermediates work on his lighter fuel load. He's going to try and take Lewis Hamilton for 5th place on track before he makes a pit stop, which I'm pretty sure they will all have to do at some point to fit on dry tyres. Lauda is in the pits, so he's making his second fuel stop and making the switch from intermediates to dry tyres as Jenson Button goes through McLaren's, now into Coppice. And Kubica's into the pits as well, so he's following Lauda's lead on lap 50. This will be their 57th lap, going on to their 58th lap, as Takuma Sato goes through Coppice. Has a pit stop to make, and that'll be from intermediates to dries. And will that put him behind? Oh, Hamilton off the track at the old hairpin. Spinning at the old hairpin goes Lewis Hamilton. Still on those intermediates, which are probably getting a bit worn out now. Now that's put Barrichello up to 4th place, but with Sato having to make a pit stop, can he make his pit stop and still rejoin ahead of Rubens Barrichello? That is the key battle for this race now. And Hamilton dropped to 6th place at that point, but anyway, Sato continuing for another lap there, as Adrian Sutil goes through Starkeys, still on intermediate tyres. And that dry line only going to get more and more. Through Starkeys goes Button, 13 seconds ahead of Sato. So, Toyota looks as if they've still got their best car for all conditions in the hands of Jenson Button. It could have easily been a 1-2 though, if Jenson hadn't optimistically sent one up the inside of Webber at the old hairpin, and sent Webber launching into the tyre barriers and out of the race. Nevertheless, Toyota will still probably be taking the most points out of this race, as through McLaren's goes Kimi Raikkonen 3rd place at the moment, as Timo Glock from 10th place comes into the pits. There's Barrichello trying to chase after Takuma Sato's 2nd place, but this is a pit stop battle between Honda and Renault. Through to start lap 60 is Jenson Button. He's got 17 more to go, and Jenson setting a new fastest lap of the race, so he's got his dry tyres up to a good temperature, and now he's lapping quicker than those on the intermediates. And there's Paul Di Resta. He is in 10th place now, but it's Kimi Raikkonen setting the new fastest lap, so he's got his tyres up to a slightly better temperature than Jenson Button, and lapping slightly quicker than the Toyota driver. Probably not enough to win the race, but he'll make a good charge of it. Looking at Timo Glock, who is being pressured by somebody. Try and work out who that was, but he's trying to chase after Christian Albers. As Rubens Barrichello, there he is in 4th place. And that's the gap. It's 25.5 seconds between himself and Takuma Sato. We'll keep an eye out on that gap, and we'll keep an eye and wait for Takuma Sato to come into the pits for the switch to dry tyres. But Kimi Raikkonen really closing in on Sato, and now the dry line starting to emerge on the pit straight. So anyone on intermediates will be starting to struggle a bit now. You'd want to be making your change to dry tyres sooner rather than later, and if anything, you'd want to switch, because once it gets too dry, then those intermediates are going to be chewed up like tobacco, and then spat out at the old hairpin. That's where we've been seeing a lot of the drivers make mistakes in this race. Seen a whole host of them, at least 4 retirements from that one corner alone. One of them was a collision, and then 3 of them were more innocuous spins. Still just the 6 retirements in this race though, and they are not Hulkenberg, it's his teammate Montoya. He was one of the first to retire. In fact, he was the first to retire. Then it was Daniel Ricciardo in the Toro Rosso. Then the next one was Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull, and then Mark Webber being absolutely totaled off the circuit by teammate Button. And then we had one more retirement there, which was Sergio Perez, and then a mechanical failure for Nick Heidfeld. New fastest lap for Button, 1:15.7, is that? Or it could be a 2. They see Kimi Räikkönen setting a quicker lap than that though. As we look at an overhead of Jules Bianchi, looking to try and gain lost time as a new fastest lap for Timo Glock. That's a curious one. Where did that come from? As Matthias Lauda, there he was in 7th place, looking to try and do something about Hamilton, but he's got Kubica right behind him as a new fastest lap for Kamui Kobayashi. So the track's only going to get quicker now. And still Sato not pitting. And Jenson Button going through the foggy S's. Now the dry line getting much more prominent on this circuit as a new fastest lap for Felipe Massa, and Hamilton finally giving up on those intermediate tyres. So he's going to switch to the dry tyres. And Sato and Barrichello, somebody else into the pits. That will be Hulkenberg, who is a fair way down the order. And Kimi's taken second on track off of Takuma Sato. And the gap between Sato and Barrichello still getting less and less as Alonso goes through Hollywood and Crane, and that's a 1:13.5 for Jenson Button. This is the time to switch to dry tyres. And Suttle, Di Resta and Albers all blinking, and Sato blinking as well. He's finally come in for those dry tyres, and that could put Rubens Barrichello up to a podium place. Keep an eye on that one as we watch Jenson Button and now Nico Hulkenberg going through the Hollywood and Crane curves. Where's Barrichello? Is he going to take 3rd place off of Takuma Sato? Keep an eye on that one. Still keep an eye out on that one as Hulkenberg goes into McLaren's corner. Barrichello across the start-finish line and takes 3rd place off of Takuma... No, has he? Wow, it's battling away quite fiercely. They were right together at the Redgate corner, but Barrichello has taken that 3rd place off of Takuma Sato. Now, Sato has got younger tyres than Barrichello, but in these inclement conditions, they shouldn't make too much of a difference. So what's that late flurry of pit stops done as Button sets a 1:13.0, enjoying himself in these damp conditions on his dry tyres. And Kimi Räikkönen, that's coming out of the Melbourne hairpin, I believe, as he is about to turn left onto Goddard's, the left-hand hairpin. And onto the start-finish straight goes Kimi Räikkönen. And 22.3 seconds behind the Brit. But there may well be a battle for 3rd place now between Barrichello and Sato. And Sato will be quite keen to take that 3rd place off of Barrichello because it will keep him in touch with that driver there, race leader Jenson Button, going into the foggy S's on his 64th lap now. And he is lapping a bit quicker than Kimi Räikkönen at this stage. Kubica now in 7th place, going through Goddard's. That was a bit wide actually through Goddard's. He missed the sweet spot of the dry line. And he'd lost 0.6 of a second. There's a new fastest lap for Fernando Alonso, 1:12 that time. So yeah, this is going to be a bit quicker. So another new fastest lap for Button, 1:12.651 that time. So that's going to be interesting to see who gets the fastest lap of this race eventually. Into the old hairpin goes Button, remaining on the dry lines like a tram would on its rails. 1:12.4 for Kimi Räikkönen that time, so he was 2/10 quicker than Jenson Button that time around. And Barrichello versus Sato, less than half a second between those two. So that's going to be quite fun to watch. And that's going into Goddard's, Barrichello versus Sato. That's the battle for third place, and Sato trying to get a good exit out of that corner, but instead going onto the wet part of the circuit. Not done him too much harm though. He tries to have a look going into red gates, but a bit more caution there. As locking his brakes into Goddard's goes Alonso, as he tries to unlap himself from Kubica. Alonso way down in 15th place. 10 places behind teammate Felipe Massa. I think in the background there it was Jenson Button coming out of Goddard's. 1:12.035 that time for him. And a bit quicker than Kimi Räikkönen on so far this lap, so I think Jenson will have won that battle on lap. That was their 65th lap. Yeah, Barrichello versus Sato. That is close for third place. So that's going to be the fight to the end. And Barrichello pulling out 3/10 over Sato. It was pretty close anyway, so Sato might well have had a go at some point, but succeeded in losing a bit of time to Barrichello. Into the foggy S's goes Jenson Button, left then right. Very tight chicane that one. Very tight 90s. Now into the Melbourne hairpin. Almost double apex. The first apex is a bit tighter than the second one, but fundamentally a 180 degree hairpin. Here you can see the Sega blimp up ahead. But Jenson Button's concentrating on the racetrack and through Goddard's corner as Kimi Räikkönen exits foggy. About to lap Nico Hülkenberg for the second time this race. Overhead shot of the BMW Sauber driver as he lets Kimi Räikkönen through. A new fastest lap for Adrian Sutil in 9th place in the Force India as he tries to chase down Hamilton. Sato's taken Barrichello. Takuma Sato's just taken 3rd place off of Rubens Barrichello. I imagine that will be going into the foggy S's. But yeah, now Sato minimising the damage compared to Jenson Button and Kimi Räikkönen as the fin goes through the old hairpin. And the track drying out nicely now, so we should be seeing some very quick times in the final 10 laps. And Massa's not that far behind Barrichello. He's only 1.3 seconds or 1.2 seconds off of his fellow Paulista. There could be a battle for 4th place soon. So it's not done yet. Lauda 6th, he's 11 seconds behind Felipe Massa, so there's no battle there, but Kubica's not that far behind Lauda, as 1:11.593 for Jenson Button that time. And we could be seeing a battle for 6th soon between Lauda and Kubica. Sutil, another new fastest lap in 11.568, I think that was. Is Kimi Räikkönen going to better that as he crosses the line? Nope. So Kimi Räikkönen looking pretty safe in 2nd now. Now if it weren't for his off at the old hairpin, he could well be leading the race. But you got to account the two Toyotas' collision at that point. Can't see any other potential battles on the circuit within the top 11. We've got Adrian Sutil 3.7 seconds, although he's catching up to Lewis Hamilton in 8th place, so there could still be a battle for there as Sato sets a new fastest lap of the race. Now that he's got past Rubens Barrichello, Sato waited a bit longer to change onto dry tyres, and if anything the newer rubber has helped him out to get ahead of Rubens Barrichello on circuit. A 1:11.309 for Jenson Button as he's pushing hard. He has no reason to, but doing it for the hell of it. And into the 1:10s now, because Adrian Sutil has set another new fastest lap. So he was one of the last to switch onto dry tyres and could still challenge for Lewis Hamilton's 8th place. So yeah, keep an eye on that one between Hamilton and Suttle. And we have got Timo Glock in the points, and he is 8 seconds behind Suttle and just less than 7 seconds ahead of Paul Di Resta as Jenson Button. Only got a few more laps to go before he could be taking his second win in a row, and more importantly his second home win in a row, because this is the second race in the UK. Had the first one at Silverstone where Jenson Button won, and this one obviously much more challenging conditions because Silverstone was held in the dry. This one started off very wet but then got a bit drier as they went along. Kimi Raikkonen didn't get his line right at the foggy S's, and as a result he's lost a bit of time to Jenson Button, but he's got no threat behind him. Sato is 25 seconds behind Kimi, and Kimi's pretty safe in second, so just needs to keep it on the road in the final few laps. And Barrichello locking up his front tyres as he's coming under more pressure from Felipe Massa, and Massa gained quite a bit in that chicane. So yeah, Barrichello's 4th place coming under threat. He nearly got a 4th place at Hockenheim but had a few major offs, and as a result he finished down in 10th, which was a bit of a heartbreaking result because that was another good drive in changeable conditions. It qualified last. Fastest lap for Sato, 1:10.6. And that's Bianchi versus Kobayashi, is that for 12th place? I think so. Yeah, Bianchi coming under pressure from Kamui Kobayashi in the dying stages of the race through Coppice, and is Kobayashi going to get a good run coming out of it? He looks pretty good to challenge Bianchi, but Bianchi not making it easy, both going onto the wet part of the track as Sato goes through the Coppice corner now underneath the Campari Vauxhall Bridge as Suttle sets another new fastest lap, 1:10.610. And I wonder if Kobayashi did overtake Bianchi in the end. We'll find out shortly, I suppose. As, yeah, Sato's closing in on Raikkonen, but there's only, at the end of this one, 6 laps for Sato to go. No chance of catching Kimi for second. But there's his teammate, Matthias Lauda, 6th place, and he's 10 seconds behind Felipe Massa. He's not that far ahead of Kubica, 1.4 seconds as a 1:10.2 for Sato, so he's pretty happy now that he has gone onto the dry tyres. So yeah, seems likely then that the Honda was set up for dry conditions, because Sato really struggled in the wet. Kimi Raikkonen is about to put a lap on the Ferrari in front of him. And now he's picked up the pace a tad. He's now less than 24 seconds behind Takuma Sato. Or is he just losing only a little bit of time per sector to Jenson Button? Proper dry line now, so drivers feeling a bit more confident now with the tyres that they're on. Now which corner is Button approaching? I think he's approaching McLaren's. And giving the curbs a bit of a wide berth as he rounds out the race. Gil Bianchi 13th. So yeah, I think Kobayashi did overtake him in the end. Yep, there's the Japanese driver in front of the Williams driver. And just behind is a Force India. Looks like he's missing a tyre actually. Keep an eye on that one. That could be a graphical glitch for Christian Albers. Yeah, he's missing a rear tyre. He's missing his right rear tyre, so a bit of a comical moment there for Albers, but doesn't seem to be slowing him down. And about to start his 73rd lap is Jenson Button. 73 out of 76, so quite a lot of laps in this one, but remember it is just a 4-kilometre long circuit, 2.5 miles. And it's a legendary circuit as well, built in the pre-war days. But this is the first time that we're racing here in the GP4 Manager Series. And it's produced quite an interesting race, partly thanks to the weather, but also thanks to quite a lot of incidents and spins at the old hairpin. So yeah, I wouldn't mind this on the calendar in the next season, but that is up to the boss of the series. Sato about to start his 73rd lap. Still catching up to Kimi Raikkonen, but not really by much. Well, not enough to challenge him, because there's only 4 laps to go, and he'd have to lap 6 seconds a lap quicker in the remaining 4 laps to stand any chance, and, well, that's probably not going to happen, but that is Raikkonen putting a lap on Timo Glock going into the foggy S's. Glock in 10th, so Ferrari looking good for a point, especially as he's 6.3 seconds ahead of Paul Di Resta. One of the many drivers to have had an off at the old hairpin. Kobayashi had one, and Kimi Raikkonen had one as well. And even the 2 Toyotas had one as well, but that was more through contact rather than driving on slippery track conditions. Which corner's Jenson Button turning into? I think that's through Redgate, as he's now on lap 74. No, it's through Coppice, actually. Underneath the bridge. Little jump in the road, and then braking hard for the Fogarty S's. And this result will certainly extend Jenson Button's lead in the championship. Sato will hang on to second in the championship. 18 points would put him on 129, but 11 points would be behind Jenson Button if it stays like this. And Kimi Raikkonen's... No, Sato will be on 126, not 129. And Kimi Raikkonen will be on 124. So just 2 points behind Takuma Sato, but Jenson Button, as he is the championship leader and as he is winning the race so far, he'll be most happy with this one. And what will it do for the Constructors' Championship as well? Well, one Toyota, 25 points. That will probably extend their lead in the championship, although Sato and Lauda, 15 plus 8, that's 23 points. Yep, so Toyota will still extend their lead in the championship. McLaren will get 18 points with Kimi Raikkonen. And where will that put McLaren actually in relation to Honda? So 18, 23, that will tie them actually on 156, 156 points for McLaren and 156 points for Honda. And 2 Renaults in the points, so that will do their Constructors' Championship quite a bit of good. Where would it put them in relation to the other teams? Well, Barrichello in 4th, that alone will move them ahead of Ferrari and BMW Sauber, so Renault should move up to 8th in the Constructors' Championship if it stays like this, and we are now on the final lap of the race. Looking at Takuma Sato, who's still on his penultimate lap. And there is your race leader going through the old hairpin, Jenson Button. And he's pacing himself now, 23.7 seconds, ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. Half a lap to go as he was going into McLaren's. There was Robert Kubica. He's still trying to chase Matthias Lauda for 6th place, but I think Lauda's just about got the measure of him. Gap is just 1.6 seconds between those two. Into the foggy S's goes Kubica. Somewhere behind Kubica is Jenson Button, and that will be to... That's a new fastest lap for Takuma Sato, 1 minute 10.0. Into Melbourne hairpin now, just one more corner to go after this one, and it's a bit of a lucky escape for Jenson Button because that collision with Mark Webber could have easily put him out of the race, but he survived that, drove out of the gravel trap at the old hairpin, and crossing the line to take his 2nd win in a row, and his 2nd home win in a row as well. Well done, Jenson Button, and with that he extends his championship lead. Hamilton will come across the line in 8th place and a lap down, and only just ahead of Adrian Sutil, so Hamilton not really that quick in the race, but he's managed to get 8th place. And this will be 2nd place for Kimi Raikkonen, as he tries to put the pressure on Takuma Sato in the Drivers' Championship, and with Sato 3rd, that will certainly help. And Di Resta coming home in 11th, just missing out on points, unfortunately for himself. Kobayashi will come home in 12th place. Could have been points for himself, but had a big off at the old hairpin. There's Albers minus his right rear tyre, coming home in 13th, and Sato 3rd. So the top 3 in the championship finished top 3 in the race. But the driver of the day must surely be Rubens Barrichello. Comes home in 4th place, having started 19th on the grid. Brilliant drive in the wet conditions, and a deserved result after what happened at Hockenheim. And just a few to go now. There we go. So, quickly recap that one. So, Jenson Button won that one from Kimi Raikkonen in the McLaren. Sato 3rd, then Barrichello 4th. And quite a large field spread as well, because we got Massa in 5th, Lauda 6th, and the last driver on the lead lap, Robert Kubica in the Renault. Good result for Renault. Hamilton 8th, Sutton 9th, and Timo Glock completing the points scorers. So there'll be a bit of a break as we engage in round 4 of the token system, and we'll be moving over to Portugal for the Portuguese Grand Prix, and that'll be held at the Estoril circuit, I believe. So we shall see you for then.